He'd had little trouble engaging with them. His ease of manner, fluency in their language, and genuine gratitude for their charity won him sympathetic ears. He listened to their stories and told them some of his own, his descent from Godwin of Wessex, the marriage of his grandfather to a Moorish princess, and his rearing in Spain, and, by evening, many were questioning whether the steward had been right to arrest him. Given more time, he had hoped to induce the captain to accept his parole and remove his shackles, but his abrupt transfer to the house had put an end to familiarity. His sleep on the wooden bench had been restful. In childhood he'd passed many a wakeful night worrying about the morrow, but as he grew, he'd come to understand the futility of so much squandered energy. The blows of Will Thurkell's cudgel across his shoulders were no less raw for imagining them in advance. The trick of closing down his thoughts had been hard to master, but, once learned, it had stood him in good stead. Even pain became bearable when the mind was able to free itself from the body. This wasn't to say he hadn't dwelt for some time on Hugh de Courteman. The Frenchman had been in the great hall when Thaddeus had been brought through the imposing entranceway the previous night. The signs of Easter Sunday's festivity lingered in the air, the redolent scent of roasted lamb, the sour smell of ale and wine, but none of the household was in evidence. Jacques Damien had sat alone at the head of a long table, the livid stain across his nose and cheek enhanced by the light of torches and sconces around the walls, his fingers playing with a garland of spring flowers on the surface in front of him. He had made Thaddeus a mocking bow, and then summoned de Courteman from the shadows behind a pillar. The shock in the Frenchman's eyes to be forced to confront the man he'd accused was very great, and Thaddeus had felt a small pity for him. It was one thing to traduce an enemy in his absence, quite another to do it to his face. For himself, he showed only indifference when de Courteman confirmed him as Thurkell. But in truth, his relief had been huge to discover that his betrayer was the duplicitous Frenchman, and not born. It would have been harder to brand a peer of the realm as a liar, particularly one for whom he had developed a liking, than a hired steward who seemed unable to remain in post. As the light strengthened outside, Thaddeus rose from the bench and moved to the window. His view was restricted by the narrowness of the slit, but he could tell he was on the northern facade of the house because he could see the roofs of the town in the distance. He had a clear picture of the lie of the building, thanks to his study of it from the hillside 2 days before, and knew the entranceway opened onto a forecourt on the southern-facing side. If he wanted to escape, that would be the easiest exit to find. But the idea wasn't a serious one, and he didn't linger on it. He knew from his counting of the guards in the soldiers' barracks that Damien had in excess of 50 armed men guarding his lord's estate, and to attempt to evade them all would be fruitless. The air was filled with the sound of the dawn chorus, and Thaddeus's gaze was drawn to a group of sparrows pecking for seeds in the grass beyond the window. There was no telling them apart, and he wondered what it was about the human face that made each so recognizable. All had eyes, noses, mouths, and hair, and the position of these features never varied. Yet no one who had acquaintanceship with a person mistook him for another. Would he be believed if he denied he'd ever met Hugh de Courteman? Only Edmund, who'd had time to think about it, listened with any enthusiasm to Lady Anne's plan to rescue Thaddeus. The others stared despondently at their hands and questioned how entering the lion's den could achieve anything but their own and Lady Anne's arrest. She placed too much trust in Master Damien's willingness to obey the law, and even more in her belief that Thaddeus would never admit that his claim to the title of Athelstan was fraudulent. She sat cross-legged on a bracken bed, sharing the cold remains of some mutton stew with Edmund, attending patiently while the youths explained that her idea wouldn't work. Each in turn tried to persuade her that she would risk her own safety if she presented herself as Thaddeus's advocate, and demanded he be tried according to law. Ian Startout spoke for them all. "You'll be condemned as a perjurer alongside him, milady, and he won't want that. He has too much regard for you to see you suffer the same fate as him." She had heard the same arguments from their fathers. "I can only be accused of perjury if he denies being Athelstan before we arrive," she said lightly. "Do you have so little faith in him that you believe he might? If he thinks it will help Develish, he will, milady."